morning, welcome back to Grace's Book Place. I'm Grace and this is my book place. Today I'm going to do my September wrap up and go through all the books that I read. I read a total of 6 books this month, which is pretty good. It's pretty good. I'm happy with that number. Let's just go through them. The first book that I read in September was technically not on my official TBR. As I'm sure you're probably sick of hearing me saying, I have been really in the mood for thrillers and mysteries and like spooky stuff recently. The first book that I read is The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. I actually, in August, I went on holiday with my husband's family to Fort William in the Scottish Highlands, and there was a little bookshop there called the Highland Bookshop, and this is a like thriller mystery book set in the Scottish Highlands. So I was like, that's really fitting, let's go for that one. So this is the first book that I picked up just as like a mood read for the beginning of September, and it was a little bit disappointing, I think, for me. I've heard people rave about Lucy Foley. This and The Guest List are books that a lot of people seem to have really enjoyed. And I can see why. I don't think it's poorly written. It's entertaining. It's fun. But for the first book that I read, when like at the beginning of my thriller kick, it was a little bit of a disappointment, mainly for the mystery side of it, I guess, because I guessed very early on exactly how this book was going to end. It was quite predictable, in my opinion, and the characters, they were also very surface level. I guess if you want a more sort of stereotypical thrillery read with a group of friends going to a cabin, and not in the woods, in the Highlands, but still. I just think that based on the archetypes that all of these friends took on, I sort of knew where this was going, and I guessed, I think, all of the twists that happen in this book. I mean, there's not loads, but there are a couple, and I sort of guessed very early on what was going to happen, which doesn't mean that it's a bad book, and like, everybody sort of thinks differently and is entertained by different things, so this is still well worth a read if you're interested in this sort of thing. And I know a lot of people did love it, but for me, of wanting a book to surprise me like this, like the mystery to really be a mystery, this didn't do it for me. But it was still fun. I still finished it, read it in one night. It was still a fun read. And I will read The Guest List, though I am not holding out high hopes for it. Because it seems to be the same story with a different filter, essentially. Like, this is a group of friends go on a holiday together, get stuck in a cabin type thing, and someone dies and mystery and chaos ensues, right? The Guest List, from the synopsis that I've read, appears to be maybe not a group of friends, but all these people who are invited to a wedding, so they probably have connections to each other, whether that's family or friends or history or like whatever. So people who have connections to each other go to a place where a wedding is being held, something happens, somebody dies, mystery, chaos ensues. Like, I feel like it's going to be basically the same thing, but I'll give it a go because I hope that I will like it more. So yeah, the second book that I read in September was Mermaid of Black Conch. I don't currently have a copy. I borrowed my mum's copy because there were 2 books in this TBR that my mum gave to me and suggested for me. The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey. My mum read this in her book club and told me I had to read it because it was brilliant. And she was right. It was very good. It had a lot of great themes in it. It talked about gender and sexuality and relations between men and women, but also very much relations between women and women, and how in a patriarchal society, like the ways in which women are cruel to each other. It discussed themes like race and colonialism too, which was really interesting and really cool to sort of read about that in the midst of this fantastical scenario. So like the basic premise is that a mermaid shows up, and that's all I'm gonna say. But it was very cool. It was really cool to see mermaids done differently. Like, obviously the actual like folklore or history of mermaids is less Disneyfied than how I think we think of mermaids now, thanks to the Little Mermaid. I've seen a lot of conversation recently around like BookTube and Bookstagram about the books that we have that have mermaids in, and how they're all a little bit, you know, Disneyfied and all of that stuff. So this is, I think, a great read if you want to read a book that tackles mermaids differently. I don't want to say too much because I think this book is really interesting and it has a lot to say, and I think you should go in and discover that yourself. But one of the things that I will say that I think is kind of important and an interesting topic for book-related things is that my mum, the copy that she owned and that she lent me and that I read was this one with this book cover. And then I saw that this cover had been released, and I was like, oh, you know, this one's way more aesthetically pleasing and pretty, and if I like the book, I'm gonna buy myself that like copy with that front cover. But after reading it, I'm now definitely gonna be buying this one. And that's because I think that whilst this one is lovely, part of the importance of this story is identity and sort of where you come from and your history and all of that stuff, and like the idea of belonging and community and everything. And how the mermaid looks is important. It's described a lot. It's important that she looks a certain way, that she looks a bit different, that you can tell sort of where she comes from or what her community was like based on how she looks and everything. The reason why I think I'm gonna get this copy is because the artwork on the front is very accurate, like surprisingly accurate, and that's important, I think, for the content of the story and everything. So I want that cover now because I want to make sure that my cover has the mermaid how I see her in my head, and this is how I see her. And this one, whilst lovely, and I wanted it initially, does call back, I think, a little bit to that Disneyfied, like, beauty queen, princess, mermaid thing that I think this book is trying to get away from. So do with that what you will. The third book that I read in September was The Maidens by Alex Michaelides, or Michaelides. I can never remember. I should probably look it up. I should look it up.
My job is to make college easier.
Alex Michaelides. Alex Michaelides.
So anyway, this was the third book I read. I'm very glad I read it. I enjoyed it a lot. It's another thriller, dark academia. I'm a fan. I read this book because somebody said to me that it was like If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, but instead of Shakespeare, it's Greek mythology. Now, I loved If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio because I love Shakespeare, and also that book's fab regardless of whether you like Shakespeare or not, so, but I love Shakespeare. And my husband is a massive Greek mythology nerd, and so it has permeated my life for the 7 years that I have been with him. So I am also a big Greek mythology fan. So this was really exciting. I was like, yes, I'm here for it. If it's like that, but with Greek mythology, I'm reading it. It's happening. I will say, though, that whilst I definitely do think there are similarities, and if you did enjoy If We Were Villains, you probably will enjoy this, but it's not as a one-to-one a comparison as it may have been made out to me. As someone, like how I took it anyway, when someone related them. Because whilst there are similar vibes of being in a school and a murder mystery happening, and like people who are real clever and like to talk about classical things, If We Were Villains is definitely far heavier on the, like, their Shakespeare or the amount of Shakespeare references that are made, or the fact that all of the characters are really into Shakespeare, so everyone's talking about Shakespeare all the time. Whereas in this, it's just that, well, I don't want to say anything, I don't want to spoil it, but not all of the characters are like Greek mythology nerds, so it's not like it's always being talked about. It comes up, it is important, but it's not a constant thread in the same way that Shakespeare is through M.L. Rio's If We Were Villains. So just be aware of that if you were hoping for the exact same vibe. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. There's, as I think is like sort of typical with Alex Michaelides, as I think is typical. I haven't read any of them, Alex Michaelides, but obviously known for The Silent Patient, which I will be reading next and hopefully will enjoy as much, if not more. But he's known for big twists and stuff like that. And he definitely got me with this one. There's a big twist and it's somewhat in two parts. And I sort of guessed the first part, like when it happened, I was like, oh yeah, makes sense. But the second part, what? So I didn't put that together. I also read this in one night though, and I was sleep deprived, so you might get it, but I didn't. I did have a couple of things that I tabbed that I thought might be worth mentioning, and I'd like to repeat before I say them. I did very much enjoy this book. I just wanted to point out some small issues that I had. So the first one was very early, it's chapter 3. Our main character, Mariana, is a therapist, a group therapist, which you find out immediately that's what she does. And then it says this in one of her sessions. As a child, Henry had suffered horrific physical and sexual abuse at the hands of his father before he was taken into care and shunted around a series of foster homes. And yet, despite all this trauma, Henry was a remarkably intelligent person, and it had seemed for a while as if his intelligence might be enough to save him. I don't know about you, but I have some qualms with that phrasing of despite all this trauma. Is it a thing that people who go through horrible traumatic experiences as children stereotypically are not intelligent? I don't think so. So that annoyed me a little bit. And then the second thing that annoyed me a tiny bit, though less, because it depends on how I think you read this section, but Mariana is lamenting the fact that she didn't have children when she should have. And it says, this was Mariana's only regret, that she had been so arrogant, so foolish as to take the future for granted. Now, this book is written from third person, so there's a narrator speaking. It's not first person. I think that this is actually intended to be, this is just how she felt. Like, those are normal feelings that you would have if you lost out on a chance to have a child if you had wanted one. Like, it's normal, I think, for people to sort of blame themselves and all of that stuff and be angry at themselves because they wish they'd have done it or this, that, and the other. However, because the narrator says it, and at no point in the rest of the book does it come up and anybody else says it's not your fault, or that's not you being selfish and terrible, or whatever, or arrogant or foolish, as it says. Instead of that, it's just left there. And so, because it's not clear that it's her thinking that, because of the third narrator, it bugged me a little bit that it was just kind of put out there that she may be, that it was an arrogant and foolish thing to do, to not know that the future was going to happen, or to not know exactly what was going to happen. And so you decided to prioritize your work and, other things, basically. And that makes you arrogant and foolish? I don't think so. I just think that, if done poorly, can work to perpetuate the idea that women's main role is to have children, and if they dare to prioritize other things, without thinking 24/7, I have to have children, then that makes them the villain, and I didn't love that. And then the last thing that I had some issues with was a potential spoiler here. So skip if you don't want to know, because this is still a very good book. These are just 3 small points. This one's less small, but these are 3 points that I had some qualms with, but the book overall I think is worth reading, and it's really fun and interesting, and just want to make sure I'm saying that. And I did really enjoy it. But at 2 points in this book, some dude kisses our main character without her permission. The first time that happens, it's a guy she doesn't like very much, and she's not interested in at all. And when he kisses her, she gets understandably quite upset and thinks he's arrogant and terrible and awful and how invasive that was and everything, all of the things that are valid. And then the second time it happens, she's hanging out with a dude that she likes, not romantically, we don't know, it hasn't yet to be confirmed at this point whether or not she does. But he likes her, and he's a nice guy, and he's been helping her out, and he seems chill. They've become friends, and they're hanging out, and he's really interested in her, and she has repeatedly said, I'm not interested, I can't do that right now, I'm focusing on other things, blah, blah, blah. She's not interested in him, she said it. Even if internally she's having emotional turmoil about whether she wants to, which is yet to be decided, but even if that's the case, she has verbally to this man said, I'm not interested, please stop asking, I'm not gonna go out with you. And then he kisses her, like, okay, before she could protest, Fred leaned forward and gently pressed his lips against hers. She felt the softness of his kiss, its warmth and tenderness. She felt both alarmed and disarmed by it. It was over as quickly as it began. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. Yes, you could, Fred. Yes, you could. And then it proceeds to have our main character be like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to hurt you. Okay, so the last dude, who granted you don't like, but whatever. The last dude kissed you without permission, and you had the correct feelings of what an arrogant git who should not have done that without my permission. Fred does it, but because Fred's nice, we'll let it slide. No! Don't kiss people without permission. And I understand, I will caveat, spontaneous kisses do happen between people who like each other. I'm not saying that before every single kiss, you should be all like, and may I kiss you? But in situations where someone has repeatedly verbally said, regardless of what you think they feel emotionally, if somebody has said, no, I'm not interested, don't kiss them. When they decide, or when they go through the turmoil, and when they think, actually I do quite like this person, then they'll want you to kiss them, but don't do it before then. Anyway, other than that, really great book. The 4th book that I read in September was Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. Ooh. This was very good. I really liked this book. It's sort of abstract in a way, experimental type stuff. I think Ocean Vuong is usually a poet, or he is a poet. And so this is very poetic, even though it's a novel, it's very poetic. It's very beautifully written. I have tabbed all of the book's beautiful in general, but I've tabbed all of the bits that really moved me, that I thought were particularly beautiful or interesting or poignant, any of the above. And it's my first time tabbing a book. But I really like this, it's really interesting. It's a letter from a son, who is Ocean Vuong, to his non-English speaking Vietnamese mother. And it's really beautiful in that way, because it's him knowing that she will never read it. So he gets to say all the things, I guess, in a way that he's been scared to say, or that he's not sure how she'll react to, and all of this stuff. And it's really lovingly done. And it's all about being an immigrant in America, having like family that didn't speak any English and having to be translator and stuff like that, sort of being split between Vietnamese heritage and American culture and all of that stuff. It's a really great informative read, written in a really lovely way for that sort of experience, and like all of the emotions going through it, and the ways in which all the awful ways in which immigrants and foreign families, when they come to America, are treated, and all of that stuff. And then it's also, in a way, a coming out story. Obviously not literally, because I know that from stuff in the book, I know that he's been out for a while, but like it talks about that process. It talks about sort of discovering love and attraction and everything at a young age, and then like going through that, and then like finding the courage to come out and talk about it and all of that stuff. So it's really beautiful, it's really lovely, and I would really recommend reading it. The only like sort of thing I have, which is not like a criticism on the book actually at all, it's how I am discovering I read and what I'm able to read in a certain way, and it's that this book had at moments, at times, less than, but at times, gave me a similar feel to No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, which I read last month, I think, and I reviewed it I made a post on my Instagram where I explained this better than I'm going to now, basically. But when I was reading this, it's written in two parts, and the first part is really, like, I think Patricia Lockwood is also a poet usually, so this is really poetic and abstract, and no real like clear timeline and storyline and everything. And I really struggled with that, because I think I'm somebody who needs quite a clear story, or like I need the description to be clear. I need to be able to picture it and know where I am and understand what's happening and what's being said. And I think I struggled a bit with this until the second half, when an event happens that makes it all a bit more coherent and a bit more focused, and there's sort of a through line, which I think was on purpose. So it's not a criticism of the book, because I think it was on purpose for Patricia Lockwood to demonstrate how, in the digital day and age that we're in, we sort of get distracted and like can't focus on what's important and this, that and the other. But in the second half, this event happens, and it puts into focus what is important, and means that we are focusing more on like what is important in life, and leaving the abstract world of the digital and all of that stuff. So it still did its job really well. I just really struggled with the abstract stuff, and that happened a tiny bit in this one, not as much. And it started off fine because it was really easy to follow and all of this stuff, but there are a couple of, I'm gonna say chapters, but they're not proper chapters. It's more like, they look like chapters, but they're not numbered or titled in any way, so it's just a break. There are certain chapters where the language gets a little bit more metaphorical and poetic, and I think that just the way that my brain works means that the gears didn't shift into that mode quick enough, and so I'd get a little bit lost about like, what are we talking about? What's happening? Wait, where are we? But that's not a criticism on the book. It's just me discovering my tastes and how exactly I enjoy taking in content. The fifth book that I read in September is Equal by Katya Adams. This is just an interesting non-fiction read. Katya Adams is a modern day theologian and church leader, I think. In addition to teaching on theological courses and at church conferences and leadership events internationally, she is also a medical doctor. So that's cool. It's a book that argues the case for equality, who'd have thunk, between men and women within faith scenarios like church and stuff, but particularly, obviously, specifically in Christian scenarios. But it has like an analysis of scripture and the Bible, and why she thinks as a Christian that the Bible says that men and women were made equally, and so should have equal opportunity in roles in the church and stuff like that, and whatever. And it's just really fascinating whether you have a faith or not. It's really interesting, I think, to see like modern day theologians discuss this stuff and see what people are saying and thinking as we move forward. So that was really cool. I thought it was very interesting. The book I read last in September was The Golem and the Jinni by Helene Wecker. This was the second book that my mum was like, you have to read this, after she read it in her book club. So this is her copy. And I really enjoyed it. Anything fantastical or magical, I'm here for. New York, 1899. Shaba is a golem, a creature made of clay brought to life by a Jewish rabbi. When her master dies on the voyage from Poland, she arrives alone in an unknown city. Ahmad is a jinni, a being of fire trapped for centuries brought back to life by Arbeli, an impoverished tinsmith who invites him to stay in his workshop in Lower Manhattan. Together, experiencing freedom for the first time, they form the most unlikely of friendships, but a powerful threat will soon test their bond, driving them back into their own worlds and forcing them to make a fateful choice. Dun, dun, dun. It was really fun. I really enjoyed it. It was really fascinating to sort of read how Helene Wecker wove all of these like magical, mythical elements from these separate cultures. So Golem is obviously like mythological sort of creature from like Jewish stories and backgrounds and stuff like that. And then the jinni, I think, is in quite a few places like mythology, but this jinni in particular was from the Syrian desert. So that was really interesting. And then bringing it to New York to have that conversation about like old and new and changes and community. It's really cool and interesting, and it says a lot of really interesting things about culture and religion, because there's obviously there's people of the Jewish faith, there's people who are Orthodox Christian from Syria, and then also Muslim characters and stuff. So it's really interesting and really cool, and it's very magical because there's a jinni and a golem, because why not? And on the back of the book it says, fans of the Night Circus will love this. And I can concur, fans of the Night Circus will love this. I read The Night Circus not that long ago, like a month or two ago, and this has, in my opinion, basically the exact same whimsical vibe as The Night Circus. In many respects, it's the same story with a different filter. And I know I said that earlier in a bad way about Lucy Foley's book, but this is in a good way. Like, they're both very good. But obviously in this case, it's not at all a one-to-one comparison. Like, this book is a lot thicker, and it's got all of those cultural aspects that I mentioned, and like two very different, detailed mythological beings and everything. So it's not going to be exactly the same as Night Circus, but it's got a similar feel to it. This sort of being dropped into this familiar yet magical landscape that doesn't make sense, but you love that it doesn't make sense. So I really enjoyed this. One thing that will make it probably feel a bit different to the Night Circus, because part of the Night Circus's magic is that it is a standalone. It sort of just happens to you, and then you're like, well, I'll never know. I'll never fully know. Like all of the background stuff and the things that went on afterwards and all of that stuff, and that's part of the beauty of the Night Circus. Whereas the Golem and the Jinni has a sequel that came out this year, and so I'm really fascinated to see how Helene Wecker is going to keep that whimsy and magical element running through an entire second book, and hopefully it holds up. And me and my mum are both terrified it won't be good enough to follow on from this. The light is going crazy. So those are the books that I read in September. This is not Mermaid of Black Conch, but it's there to represent Mermaid of Black Conch. So those are all the books I read. Let me know if you read any of the books I mentioned, if you had the same thoughts as me, if you had different thoughts, or reading experiences are valid. So let's have a conversation. I'd really love to know what you think. Subscribe and like to this channel if you like it here. Thank you for hanging out with me in my book place, and I hope I'll see you next time. Bye.